Remember when your school computer lab smelled like hot plastic and had keyboards with that chunky beige feel? There was a time in Canada when innovation meant bold experiments, homegrown computers in classrooms, futuristic trains that looked like rockets, and pop that came in refillable glass bottles you'd haul back to the depot for your deposit. These weren't just gadgets or brands. They were part of Saturday morning routines, family road trips, and the promise that Canada could build the future right here at home. Today, we're cracking open the time capsule on 20 innovative Canadian products from the 1980s that failed miserably. Let's dive in. Telidon Videotex. Before the World Wide Web, before AOL dial-up tones, there was Telidon. If you walked into a public library or a Bell Canada demo booth in the early 80s, you might have seen it. A clunky terminal with a screen full of blocky, colorful graphics, menus for news, weather, classified ads, even restaurant listings. It looked like the future drawn in pixel art. Telidon was Canada's ambitious attempt at a videotex system using a graphic standard called NAPLPS. The federal government backed it with serious funding. Bell and cable companies ran trials from Manitoba to California. The promise? Interactive information at your fingertips, delivered over phone lines or cable TV, years before anyone said, Internet. But here's the thing, building the system was one thing. Filling it with content people actually wanted to read was another. Terminals cost a small fortune, hundreds of dollars for households, thousands for businesses. The information services were thin. You could check the weather or browse a few news headlines, but there wasn't enough there to make it worth the cost or the hassle of learning a whole new interface. When government funding dried up on March 31, 1985, the business model collapsed. Without subsidies, nobody could afford to keep the servers running or pay content providers. Telidon terminals gathered dust in storage rooms, and Canada's proto-internet dream faded into a footnote. If you remember punching buttons on one of those Scepter terminals at the airport or the mall, you witnessed a glimpse of the future, just 10 years too early and a few $billion too expensive. Ontario's Icon School Computer. Walk into an Ontario school computer lab in 1985, and you'd see rows of beige Icon workstations, each one with a built-in monitor, a trackball instead of a mouse, and a badge that proudly read, Icon, Integrated Computer-Based Ontario Network. The nickname? The Bionic Beaver, because it was homegrown Canadian tech with a QNX operating system that almost nobody outside Ontario had ever heard of. The provincial government went all in. They wanted every classroom wired up with Canadian-made computers running Canadian software. Teachers got training. Schools got grants. For a few years, the Icon was everywhere. Networked labs running educational programs, word processors, even simple games. But the rest of the world was moving fast. IBM-compatible PCs were flooding the market, and with them came an explosion of software, spreadsheets, databases, games, creative tools. Teachers wanted to use the same programs they saw advertised in magazines. Parents wanted their kids learning on machines that matched what businesses were buying. The Icon couldn't keep up. Its software library stayed small. Compatibility was a headache. By the early 90s, school boards were quietly swapping them out for beige towers running DOS and Windows. When ministry support officially ended in 1994, the Icon was orphaned, a bold experiment that got out-marketed and out-softwared by the clone army. If you learned to type on an Icon, you were part of Ontario's last stand for a homegrown edtech ecosystem. It didn't last, but for a brief moment, it felt like the future was being built right here. Dynalogic Hyperion Portable. In 1983, if you wanted a portable computer, you were basically hauling around a sewing machine. The Dynalogic Hyperion was Canada's entry into that awkward early market, a so-called luggable PC that weighed about as much as a case of beer and came with a tiny built-in screen, dual floppy drives, and a handle on top. Dynalogic, based in Ottawa, was trying to beat Compaq at the portable game. They marketed it as a business tool. Take your office on the road, work on the train, impress clients with your futuristic setup. The software came bundled. The design was ambitious, but it had problems. Compatibility with IBM software was spotty. Gremlins in the code meant some programs just wouldn't run. Reliability was hit or miss, and Compaq, which launched around the same time, had tighter IBM compatibility and faster iteration cycles. They fixed bugs, updated models, and built a reputation. Dynalogic couldn't keep pace. By the mid-'80s, the Hyperion was yesterday's news. Compaq owned the portable market, and Dynalogic faded into obscurity. If you ever lugged one of those beige boxes through an airport, you were part of a brief, awkward chapter in Canadian computing history, one that got out-engineered by the Americans just as the portable revolution was taking off. C-Channel Premium Arts TV 1983 was the year Canada launched its first wave of premium pay TV channels. While First Choice and Super Channel were duking it out over movie rights, there was a quieter experiment happening. C-Channel, a national service dedicated entirely to high culture, opera, ballet, theater, symphony performances. It was a beautiful idea. Finally, Canadians outside Toronto and Montreal could watch world-class arts programming from their living rooms. The federal broadcasting regulator blessed it. Launch ads promised a cultural revolution. But the math didn't work. Subscribers cost money to acquire. Content licensing cost money. And when families had to choose between paying for movies or paying for opera, most picked movies. The audience for premium arts programming turned out to be much smaller than the business plan hoped. C-Channel lasted about 5 months. By early 1984, it was gone, shut down, assets liquidated, a cautionary tale about niche programming in a price-sensitive market. If you remember flipping through channels and stumbling onto a ballet performance with weirdly good video quality, you might have caught C-Channel in its brief, doomed run. It was Canadian cultural ambition meeting cold economic reality, and reality won fast. The Pop Shop's refillable 24 case. If you grew up in Ontario or the prairies in the 70s and early 80s, you knew the ritual. Load up the empty Pop Shop bottles into that red plastic crate, haul it to the depot, and come back with 24 fresh ones, your choice of flavors. Black cherry, orange, cream soda, lime Ricky. You could mix and match. It was like building your own soda variety pack, and it felt special because you were doing it at a Pop Shop depot, not a grocery store. The Pop Shop started in London, Ontario in 1969, and for a while it was everywhere. The refillable glass bottles were cheaper than cans, and the deposit system meant families kept coming back. It was a direct-to-consumer model before that phrase existed, and it gave the cola giants a run for their money. But by the early 80s, supermarkets were fighting back. Private label sodas, no-name colas, and discount fruit punches undercut Pop Shop on price and convenience. You didn't need to make a special trip to a depot. You just grabbed a case off the shelf at the grocery store, no deposit, no hassle. The Pop Shop couldn't compete. In 1983, the company ceased operations. The depots closed. Those red crates ended up in basements and garages, holding tools or empties for the beer store. If you remember the taste of Pop Shop cream soda, sweeter and thicker than anything else, you remember a piece of Canadian soda culture that got steamrolled by the convenience economy. Telling and preparing this video took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the video. Stubby beer bottle standard. For more than 2 decades, Canadian beer came in one shape, the Stubby. It was short, it was squat, it was 341 milliliters of pure efficiency. The design wasn't about looks, it was about logistics. Stubbies were easier to stack, harder to break, and cheaper to ship. Breweries loved them. The whole country used them. If you opened a beer fridge anywhere in Canada, you saw rows of Stubbies. They became a cultural icon. That chunky little bottle was as Canadian as hockey or Mounties. It didn't matter if you were drinking Labatt, Molson, or some regional brew, it came in a Stubby. But in the early 80s, marketing people started whispering. The Stubby looked old-fashioned. It didn't photograph well in ads. American beers were coming in tall, sleek, long-neck bottles that looked cooler, younger, more modern. Breweries worried they were losing the image war, so they switched. By 1986, the major breweries had phased out the Stubby in favor of the AT2 long-neck standard. It was coordinated across the industry, a packaging revolution driven by aesthetics and cross-border branding, not function. The Stubby disappeared almost overnight. If you remember hoarding a case of the last Stubbies or seeing the news segments about the end of an era, you witnessed Canada ditching one of its most recognizable symbols for a taller, more American look. The long neck won, but the Stubby? That was peak Canada in a bottle. Can-Am Motorcycles' Bombardier wasn't just about ski-doos and trains. For a while in the 70s and 80s, they made motorcycles, serious, off-road racing machines under the Can-Am brand. These bikes had legitimate motocross cred. They competed. They won races. They showed that Quebec engineering could hold its own against the Japanese giants. But motorcycles are a brutal business. The Japanese manufacturers, Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, Kawasaki, were pumping out reliable, affordable bikes at a pace Bombardier couldn't match. Margins got crushed. Bombardier started outsourcing production to keep costs down, but that diluted the brand. Investment dried up. By 1987, Bombardier pulled the plug. Production stopped. The Can-Am name faded from the motocross circuit. If you owned one, you had a piece of rare Canadian racing history and a parts availability nightmare. It was a reminder that even when you build something good, you're competing with global giants who can outproduce, outmarket, and outlast you. Can-Am motorcycles were excellent. They just weren't enough. UAC Turbo train in Canada. Picture this, a sleek red-nosed train that looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie, gliding along the tracks between Toronto and Montreal at speeds that made conventional rail look slow and boring. That was the UAC Turbo train, powered by gas turbines, basically jet engines on rails. It debuted in 1968, and for a while it was the pride of CN Rail. Fast, futuristic, and loud. Passengers loved the design. Engineers loved the engineering. It was supposed to be the future of intercity rail. But reality had other plans. The turbo trains had reliability issues from the start, mechanical gremlins, breakdowns, delays. Then came the oil shocks of the 70s. Suddenly, gas turbines weren't economical anymore. Fuel costs skyrocketed. A fire in 1979 didn't help the image. By October 30, 1982, the last turbo train made its final run. CN switched back to conventional diesel locomotives. The dream of jet-powered passenger rail in Canada died quietly on a fall afternoon. If you ever rode the turbo train, you experienced a brief, beautiful moment when Canada tried to out-future the future and ran out of fuel money doing it. De Havilland Dash 7. The de Havilland Dash 7 was an engineering marvel. 4 engines. Insanely quiet. Built for stall, short takeoff and landing, which meant it could hop into city center airports with tiny runways that bigger planes couldn't touch. It was designed in Toronto, and it was perfect for niche routes, island airports, remote communities, steep approaches. Airlines bought them. The Dash 7 could sneak into places like London City Airport with its famously steep glide path. It was a problem solver. But here's the catch. The niche was too small. 4 engines meant 4 times the maintenance. Operating costs were higher. And for most routes, airlines didn't actually need STOL capability. They needed cheap, reliable twins. The market wanted the Dash 8, which came later with 2 engines and lower costs. production of the Dash 7 ended in 1988. It was technically brilliant and commercially underwhelming. If you ever flew on one, you remember how eerily quiet it was, like gliding instead of flying. That silence was expensive, and the market didn't want to pay for it. The Slowpoke district heating demo. This one sounds like science fiction, but it was real. AECL, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, built a small nuclear reactor called Slowpoke 3 at the Whiteshell Lab in Manitoba. It wasn't for electricity, it was for heating. The idea? A tiny, ultra-safe reactor that could heat water for district heating systems, basically a nuclear boiler for neighborhoods. It was years ahead of today's small modular reactor hype. The reactor worked, the demo ran, the engineering was sound. But there was one problem. Nobody wanted to buy it. Municipalities weren't lining up to install nuclear heating systems. The public wasn't ready. The economics didn't pencil out without serious subsidies. Despite the technical success, there was no market. In 1989, AECL shut down the demo and started decommissioning. The Slowpoke 3 remains a footnote, a bold, weird experiment in urban energy that came decades before its time and went nowhere. If you worked at Whiteshell or toured the facility, you saw a piece of nuclear innovation that Canada built and then quietly mothballed because the cities didn't want it. Pay TV arts versus movies. Shakeout. 1983 wasn't just the year of C Channel. It was the year Canada's entire premium TV ecosystem launched and immediately started tearing itself apart. First Choice, Super Channel, and the doomed C Channel all went live at once, scrambling for subscribers who suddenly had to decide movies or culture, comedy or opera. Decoder boxes showed up on TVs across the country. Free preview weekends tried to hook viewers. Marketing blitzes promised a revolution in home entertainment. But price-sensitive households picked one service, maybe two. The Arts Channel couldn't compete with movie nights. Within months, C Channel folded. The others consolidated. The grand experiment in specialty premium TV revealed a hard truth. Canadians would pay for movies, but niche programming had to find another way. If you remember the excitement of those first pay TV channels and the confusion of trying to figure out which decoder box did what, you lived through Canada's first big subscription TV shakeout. The movies won, the arts lost. And the industry learned that premium had limits. Provincial EdTech procurement. The icon wasn't just a computer, it was part of a bigger system. GEMS, Ontario's centralized educational technology procurement program. The idea was simple: standardize school tech purchases, get volume discounts, make sure every classroom got compatible equipment. In practice, it locked schools into the icon ecosystem. Teachers wanted software that ran on PCs. Students wanted to learn on machines they'd see in the real world. But GEMS made it easier and cheaper to buy icons, so that's what schools bought. As DOS and Windows exploded in the late 80s, the gap got worse. Schools started finding workarounds, buying PCs outside the program, using donated equipment, quietly letting the icons gather dust in storage rooms. By the mid-90s, GEMS and the icon were both relics. The program ended, the computers got surplused, and Ontario schools joined the rest of the world in the beige tower PC era. If you learned on an icon while your friends at other schools learned on IBM clones, you were caught in a procurement policy that tried to build a walled garden and watched it get overrun by the open market. The long neck beer switch. The Stubby's death wasn't an accident. It was a coordinated industry campaign. Breweries spent years planning the switch to long neck bottles, taller, skinnier, more photogenic in ads. They called it the AT2 standard, and by the mid-80s, it was rolling out nationwide. The marketing pitch? Long necks looked modern. They fit better in American-style six-pack carriers. They aligned with cross-border branding as Canadian breweries eyed export markets. Sales reps told retailers the Stubby was dead. Bottling lines got retooled. By 1986, long necks were the new normal. The Stubby era was over, not because the bottle failed, but because the industry decided it looked too Canadian in a world that wanted sleek and standardized. If you remember the weird transition period, some stores still selling Stubbies, others all long necks, you watched Canada's beer identity get rebranded in real time. The long neck won on looks. The Stubby lost on aesthetics. Function didn't matter. Image did. Beaver Processed Foods Maple Flavor Soda. Imagine walking into a corner store in Thunder Bay or Trois-Rivières in the summer of 1981 and spotting something new in the cooler, a golden brown soda bottle with a big red maple leaf on the label. The tagline read, "Pure Proud Canadian." This was Beaver Processed Foods' Big Swing, a maple syrup-flavored soft drink that promised to bottle the actual taste of Canada. The timing seemed perfect. Early 80s Buy Canadian campaigns were everywhere. People wanted to support homegrown brands. Beaver marketed the drink as a natural sweetener alternative, made with real domestic maple syrup instead of corn syrup or artificial flavors. TV ads showed families pouring it at picnic tables, hockey rinks in the background, Canadiana dripping from every frame. Retailers across Ontario and Quebec gave it shelf space, right next to Canada Dry and Crush. For a few months, it looked like Beaver had cracked the code, a uniquely Canadian soda that could ride the patriotic wave and maybe even export as a novelty. But there was a problem. It tasted weird. Maple syrup is thick, rich, meant for pancakes and snow taffy, not carbonation. In soda form, it was cloyingly sweet. The flavor didn't quite work. Some people said it tasted like drinking pancake syrup mixed with club soda. Others said it left a strange aftertaste. Either way, repeat customers were hard to find. Then came the economics. Real maple syrup wasn't cheap. Glass bottles cost more than cans. The product had a short shelf life because they were using natural ingredients. National distributors took one look at the margins and passed. Without big distribution, Beaver couldn't scale. Without scale, the costs stayed high. By 1983, maple flavor soda had quietly vanished from shelves. A few novelty bottles ended up in collectors' fridges, souvenirs of a patriotic experiment that sounded great in the boardroom and flopped in the marketplace. If this trip down memory lane hit you right in the nostalgia, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss another deep dive into Canada's forgotten history. Got a memory of one of these products? Drop it in the comments.